So this is a Singer 7134. It's a straight buttonhole maker. Uses a whip stitch, bars both ends, and cuts after sewing. These old Singer buttonholers are pretty cool. The number of stitches on this buttonhole just kind of depends on how long you set the machine to do the buttonholes. And you can adjust the width of the zigzag, you can set the length of the buttonhole, you can set the distance from the two sides from each other. If you were to sew a more narrow zigzag, in effect, it's going to leave you with a wider hole in the middle. So then you can adjust it to move the two sides closer to one another. So it's pretty neat that this machine has all of those adjustments. And so I'm going to go over some of the high points on some of the things that you can adjust on this model of buttonholer. For this old machine, I've got a couple of instruction manuals. This one says from 7130 to 7153, and this one just states class 71. These books are not in very good condition, but the information remains. This book does not list a 7134. It's got a few copyrights, 1914 through 1938, but this has been a good book. The adjustments seem to apply. In this book, which is a little harder to use because of the tape that someone put on it, but this one does list the 7134 as well as all these others. I find it interesting that the 7134 makes whip stitch buttonholes from 3/8 to 3/4 inch long with barred ends and cuts the thread and hole after stitching. The 7132 does the exact same order of operations but with a purl stitch. The difference in the whip stitch and the purl stitch, from what I have been able to find on the internet, is subtle. What I read was basically it's the difference of the top tension. So you can have the top and the bottom thread meet centered on the fabric like I'm accustomed to doing, or with the purl stitch you have a tighter top tension and you pull the bottom thread up and around, and so the joining of the threads will be on top of the fabric. A subtle difference. There may be more to that than I know. If you know, put it down in the comments. Another little interesting tidbit here. The type of thread used in a purl stitch should be right twist thread, and the type of thread to be used in a whip stitch buttonhole is the left twist thread. I don't know that I've ever had any right twist thread. Most of the sewing machine literature that I've ever had says that you need to use left twist thread, so I believe that's the most common type of thread. So I don't know exactly where to start on this, so let's just start here on the top. Thumb screw A regulates number of barring stitches. So right here we have a number printout, 2, 6, 10, and there's also indices between those numbers. So you can infer 4, 8, 12, etc. And that number indicates the number of barring stitches at the end of each buttonhole. So at the end of each buttonhole you sew the side, and then there's barring stitch that goes the full width of the buttonhole, and then you have the other side, and then you have the other barring stitch on the end. So the barring stitches are the widest stitches on either end of a buttonhole. Thumb screw B is for regulating the width of bite. So on this buttonhole, there is a zigzag on each side, and so that zigzag has a width, and they call that width the bite. So you can make the side more narrow or wider with this adjustment here. So if you loosen this, this operates in this slide. So let's just move that a little bit to the middle of the slide and see how we differ from this. I moved it to the extreme other end. So this is the one I was pointing at first, and then I moved the lever to the halfway point and then to the extreme opposite end. You can see that the width of the zigzag on each one gets a little more narrow. As the bite narrows, the gap between widens. So if you wanted to have that narrow of a bite on your buttonhole, but you didn't want that big gap in between them, there's a setting for that too. So I'll show you how this machine can move the two sides of the buttonhole towards one another. That I want to adjust the cutting space. So to do that, we regulate screw H in figure 14. All right. Screw H. It's going to be right here in the surface of the bed. When we talk about cutting space, we're talking about the distance between the two sides of the buttonhole. And I want to narrow the cutting space. So this screw is in a slot. So let's try that. All right, I'm just going to put it right next to this one here so we can compare the wide distance to a more narrow distance. You can see a big difference between the one with the wide cutting space and the more narrow cutting space. So this is how you adjust your cutting space. All the adjustments have to be, taken together in context. From here we narrowed the bite and we got to here, and then we narrowed the cutting space and we got to here. Now we can see that, just luckily, the cutting space on this narrow bite buttonhole is approximately the same as the cutting space on this buttonhole with the wide bite. So really, in order to get from here to here, we have to make two adjustments. One, the narrower bite, and two, the narrower cutting space. One of the main adjustments on a buttonholer is the length of the buttonhole. Really, that is determined by the size of the button you're going to use. So if you have a small button, your buttonhole is not going to be very long. And if you have a big button, your buttonhole is going to be longer, like this. That's behind this plate. You just pull that off, and then you'll need a gauge like this. So this gauge has some indices on it that tell you buttonhole length. So from 3/8, this gauge looks like it goes to 1 inch. So there's a line on the bed of the machine that you will line up with one of these indices. And that looks like this. So to adjust our buttonhole length, we go behind this plate, and right here is a nut to loosen, and then there's this arm. Singer has a purpose-built wrench. So to make the adjustment, I have to loosen this. So now this will slide along that slot. So this will be a longer buttonhole and this will be a shorter buttonhole. Put the gauge on. The mark in the bed of the machine is right here. So if I wanted to set it at a 1/2 inch, it would be here. I'm holding this arm against the end of this gauge. So if I push the gauge, it pushes the arm. There's 5/8. You can go as short as, according to the manual, 3/8. So it'd be right there. So I want about 9/16, which is right between a 1/2 and 5/8. So now the challenge is to tighten that down without moving it. Check it. That'll work. Place this plate. And let's sew a buttonhole. Okay, I think you can see that these are now shorter. These two are shorter than the one just before it. So we've regulated the length of the buttonhole, the width of the bite, the cutting space, and the last thing I want to do in this video is regulate the distance between stitches, and that is done with B in figure 18. The distance between stitches is regulated by the thumb nut B in figure 18, which holds the ends of the driving lever pitman in the slotted lever underneath the bed of the machine. To increase the distance between stitches, loosen the thumb nut and move it to the left. To decrease the distance between stitches, move the thumb nut to the right. When desired distance between stitches has been obtained, tighten the thumb nut. Alright, so we're going to have to go to the bottom of the machine for this. Now to set this machine back onto this kickstand, I've got to open this belt guard. Just take that belt off. Release the chains underneath. There's a clamp chain and the make it go chain. And also unplug the lamp. So here's that thumb screw, the slot. So to the right, closer stitches, to the left, farther apart. So let's make them farther apart since they're pretty close right now. And let's go again. So perhaps you can begin to see the distance between the stitches now. And there's still room to go on the adjustments in the machine, but that's basically adjustments that you can make to change the character and size of your buttonhole. Well, anyway, I hope you found that interesting. If you're still watching this video, thanks a lot. Consider becoming a subscriber. I really appreciate that. Give it a thumbs up if you liked it too. Thanks a lot for watching.